Hello, readers. This is Justin's 52 Books, where I discuss my selections for the 52 Book Club's 2023 Reading Challenge. And I'm doing it only with science fiction written by women for the year 2023. I really want to explore the legacy of women writing science fiction with this reading challenge. This is week 2, and I am talking about Prompt 2, a book featuring an inheritance. My selection for this prompt is Life by Gwenyth Jones. I'll totally own that this is probably not the monetary inheritance that one assumes would go with the prompt, but when it comes to reading challenges, the name of the game is your challenge, your rules. So I chose a book about genetic inheritance, or at least that's what I meant to do and what I thought I was doing. The story follows a young woman and then her spouse and her family through life. It's a very aptly named book. It's called Life, and that's what we are discussing in the book. It's her or their lives. And we're examining the personalities and the feelings of the characters as they go through college, go into the workforce, farm out their labor, intermingle with old friends and new, struggle with having kids, struggle with childcare and the isolation with that, and infidelity, and sexism in the workplace, and being fired, and life and life and life and life. It's life. Basically, all the compromises that come from life, with a real lens on compromises that we must make due to our gender, for both men and women. All of that while Anna, the main character, discovers, promotes, and brings forward a discovery that she makes about X and Y chromosomes and how they're created and perpetuated. I didn't really follow all of the biology, but it has something to do with viruses. And the import of that discovery becomes palpable at the end, when the ongoing process called transferred Y is understood to threaten the existence of the Y chromosome, and that in a generation or 2 or 3 there will be no more chromosomal males, effectively making a world without men. I do believe that there are still physical males, and I'm not entirely sure how that was supposed to work. I didn't catch it if it was discussed. It didn't seem like it was threatening the species. It was more along the lines of, what is life going to be like without men anymore? I stuck with it, the book, after several moments of sheer frustration, not with the lack of men part, but earlier on with the just the life parts. Lots of frustration with the characters. I think the characters were supposed to be frustrating. I'm glad I did stick with it. I'm glad I read this book. But it's a book that really made me examine myself and, my place in the world, as feminist literature should do. Made me examine how I relate to fiction as well. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And it's a real piece of feminist literature, and that was something that I have opened myself up to very willingly with this reading challenge, reading all women. However, I hated almost all of the characters, and I kind of hated reading their life story. And I think that was designed. I think that is designed by the writer. I think that she made unlikable characters on purpose. It's weird to have a book that is so realistic that it's actually difficult to read, and it still has a villain. And it's weird that the villain isn't a rapist. There is a rape earlier in the book. It's not graphic, but so that it say that it's there. But the rapist isn't the villain. He's just part of the environment, part of the scenery. No, the villain is this Ramona character there. So you have Anna and Ramona. You have these two characters. And Ramona is kind of so philosophically uncompromising, to the point where every idea must be challenged type of character, that it just drives you nuts, because it's at one time so exaggerated, and at the same time it's so realistic. I feel like I knew or have known people like this Ramona character. You have Anna, who makes all the compromises all the time, and you have Ramona, who will never compromise for anything, and you watch those two both suffer for their decisions. And I think it's a tack that the writer uses to push the reader's buttons and assumptions. And I can get behind that, but I also need a reason to have my buttons pushed. Otherwise, it's just banging your head against the wall because of the folly of it all. And I only have so much patience, and I expect the reader to only have so much patience for that. Furthermore, the maybe it's because it's just about life, but it felt like a play. The characters standing in as archetypes for conditions and ideals we all have to experience. Specifically, that compromising versus uncompromising thing. However, while I do see hints and familiarities to my real living world, which I think the author was trying to get to, I think the author brings in limitations to to her perspective as a writer. I think those limitations, perspective limitations, follow her into the book in terms of class and education, to the point where she's having her characters ostensibly push buttons for the sake of pushing them but there's no real lasting point made, and it felt a little nihilistic at times. And it really reminded me of another writer, and Gwenyth Jones actually thanks this other writer in a foreword and an afterword, like he was a test writer. That's Kim Stanley Robinson. Very, very much a book akin to Kim Stanley Robinson's books. That idea of having this story and this idea move forward with the characters and having these science fictional elements play into it, but you're really making points about people and the human condition, often with unlikable characters. The science fictional aspects of the book are interesting because they are just barely tangentially there, which is interesting because I found out about the book through its inclusion in the SF Masterworks series. So it's weird to have this book on the same shelf as Dune and Arthur C. Clarke and all these other science fictional mainstays, and here's this book with barely any science fiction. I'd say that's very ahead of its time, because that's a fairly common thing now to have literary writers using science fiction ideas. This was written in 2004, and I'd say it's about 15 years ahead of its time. It's very, very much, it made me feel a lot like I felt when I read Clara and the Sun. Not exactly a book I enjoyed either, but very literary, very, very slice of life with these weird science fictional elements to drive a point or to present real life at an angle, I suppose. Yeah, very literary. Another way it's ahead of its time is in its concept of what I would call the decay of men. Jones is writing in a world where they're never talked about, but men's rights activists are completely plausible, and incel shit for brain makes sense in this world. There's hardly anything like that in the story, but the implications for men are obvious, and the reactions are all implied. And in some ways, that's the most accurate speculative fiction I've ever read. I hated the Spence character, the main character's husband, for reasons that have nothing to do with any fictional aspects of the book and have a lot to do with me, myself. And in fact, Jones actually treats the character pretty nicely. He's very sympathetic. He's a very sympathetic character for being such an asshole. I'm glad to have read it. I'm glad that I read this book. I can't say I enjoyed it, but that's okay. I don't need that Venn diagram to touch all the time. It's probably the least escapist science fiction I've ever read. And it made me question that. Do I need escapism? I'd like to think that I don't. I'd like to think I'm a big boy who can read a big boy book, or a big girl book as well, being that it's feminist literature. But yeah, it made me ask the question, do I need escapism? Maybe, maybe not from science fiction, but here's the thing. It might be the least escapist fiction I've ever read, and I wasn't prepared for that. So other options I could have gone for with inheritance as a theme. N.K. Jemisin put out the Inheritance trilogy. I read The 100,000 Kingdoms a couple of years ago. Maybe should have read the second in that series. If I wasn't reading All Women, The Genetic Inheritance, definitely go with Seven Eves. I love that book. I've read that book twice, and that's not all about genetic inheritance, but certainly has those themes. And as far as monetary inheritance, well, we've always lived in the castles and mainstay. Shirley Jackson's a wonderful author. Perhaps I shouldn't have just read that in December, but I did, and here we are. Thanks for watching me talk about my thoughts about life by Gwenyth Jones. This has been week 2 of Justin's 52 books, and I was talking about Prompt 2, a book about inheritance. For more information on the 52 Book Club, you can check them out on their website, the52bookclub.com. You can also check them out on Goodreads, Facebook, and Instagram. I'm pretty active on the Facebook comment section. You can also check me out on Goodreads and Storygraph, Justin's 52 Books. I hope to see you next week for Prompt 3, a book starting with the letter G. And online, I sometimes hear people gripe a little bit about letter prompts. As they're kind of arbitrary and not really getting to important things like inclusivity or literary things like page number or anything like that. But I find that it's a valuable thing for me to reevaluate how I think about books, and anything that causes that to happen, even arbitrarily, I find rewarding, and I find new ways to think about books. And this is really the case with the letter G here. And I hope to talk about it next week, and I hope to see you there. Until then, happy reading.